Hello and welcome to the fifth part in a series of videos where I show how I've painted some Titans from Games Workshop's Adeptus Titanicus game in this colour scheme of Legio Mordaxis. In this part I show how I painted the leg stripes on one of the Reaver Titan leg panels by stippling layers on through masking tape. Before we can do any trim we need to do any patterns. Now by patterns I mean stripes, hexes, that type of thing. I'm going to probably just use a simple stripe pattern. So what I've done is I've got this ready by masking off one of the leg panels. This is panel 7 and I've used, this is Tamiya flexible masking tape. The reason I've used this is because it's actually it's a bit thicker than the traditional masking tape and it goes around curves. I feel better. So I've applied this in lots of strips. Now, I don't want to keep all these strips. So what I'm going to do is I've used this as a guide so I know that I've got everything is equidistant. So I'm going to pull every other one off. And that's the stripes I'm going to actually apply. So just push it in with a nail to make sure you got it in. I'm not going to airbrush this, although that might seem a little strange considering that I do like my airbrush. What I found with when I was doing my experimentation, what I found was by stippling on, I actually got a much nicer effect. I got a bit of texture in there and it was a lot easier to control. It also meant that I didn't have this issue where if this isn't pressed on hard enough and you airbrush, it will go under the tape. When I'm stippling this, it won't. So I'm using an artist's opus brush and I'm using the way they've developed for doing stippling and dry brushing. However, you can actually use any soft dry brush, soft round dry brush. I know that Army Painter are coming up with some, and I believe Rosemary & Co do brushes very similar that are smooshing brushes. Artist's opus brushes are great, but they're very, very premium. So this is just water. This is a piece of sponge in a little plastic container. With a bit of blue tack on the bottom so that it doesn't move around, and all you do is you put some water on the top, rub it into the top of the sponge with your finger so that basically the top of your sponge is slightly damp. What you then do is you drag your dry brush over it, wipe over it over on a piece of towel. The concept is that by making the bristles, it's not even damp, but slightly lubricated, the paint doesn't stick to the bristles. The paint comes off and goes onto your model. So the first colour we're going to use is Citadel Celestra Grey. Apologies, this is a very tatty looking pot, but you just want a little bit. And then work that into your brush. You don't want to, unlike a dry brush where you want to pull it all off, you don't when you're stippling. You want a little bit more on, and literally you just dab it on like this. As you can see, it's going all over the edge trim. That's fine because we're painting that second, aren't we? So, a bit more. Now, one thing you do need to be careful of is that you don't pull off what you've already done. So if you start dry brushing it as if you in a normal way, what you'll find is because the contrast paint is slightly shiny, you will actually start pulling off that the paint you've just stippled on, which is less than ideal. So a little bit more water. Like I say, make sure it's not wet. And just stipple on. To a certain extent, you can't go too over the top with this because this is a base. This is a base layer for everything else. One thing I do find with these brushes is they will occasionally molt. It's fine, just make sure that if it does molt, you get rid of the bristle and don't just blindly carry on going ahead. And you're aiming not for a solid coat, but you're aiming for a sort of a fairly consistent layer of this. That's not a million miles off. You can actually see, if I compare it to one of these, you can see that actually it makes a fairly big difference. Now, you could choose, if you wanted to do this in a bone colour, which possibly would be more appropriate for an army or a legio that eventually falls to Nurgle. I just prefer this white. I think this comes actually, with my testing, comes out really nicely. So I think that's good enough. You've got a nice coverage all the way over. So the next colour you want to do, you don't need to just dry that out, wipe that off, get rid of most of the paint. The next colour is Ulthuan Grey. Now you could, if you wanted to, this is fairly light, you could go to something a bit brighter with a grey sear if you wanted, but again I think this works quite well. Now this you need to probably be a little bit more careful on because it is quite a bit brighter. The key is you want it nice and smooth, rather than sort of streaky or blobby or anything like that. So just stipple it all over. And you'll find, but this one, because this is a layer paint rather than a base paint, you'll actually find, because it's a bit thinner to begin with, it actually spreads over the surface a little bit more easily. Just gently go over. Now, one of the things that you can actually do using this technique quite successfully is you can use nail art transfers. Now, the benefit of using nail art transfers is the fact that you can get some much more funky shapes. Just doing it with masking tape is a bit restrictive because you can only do straight lines. So there we go. So I think that's probably as far as you need to take it. So now the exciting bit where you start to pick off the tape. And that is one panel that has stripes on. And if I close that before I knock it over, just popping that onto your Titan just to see what it's like, it actually makes a huge amount of difference. Now, you will use the same technique for whatever you do. So whether you do it on the purple or the black, doesn't make any odds. And if you're doing big chunky stripes, just use either a thicker masking tape or use more than one piece of masking tape. And that's it really. Next video we'll start getting onto the armour trim and go from there. Hope you enjoyed this part. I think that applying stripes and markings really helps to give each Titan its own personality. In part 6 I go through painting the armour trim from start through to finish. I'd love to hear from you, so please leave comments or questions below and feel free to subscribe to my channel or follow me on Twitter or Instagram.